the positive.
Yeah, man. So BJ, you've been not only following this story that just broke, but you've been kind of on the cusp of this one for a long time, and you've been kind of like covering the seedy underbelly of not only the WWE but the pro wrestling world for 20 years. What are you making of just kind of how this thing is all playing out right now?
I think that this is probably the worst nightmare WWE could have had. They got Vince, they got his phone, they got all of his communications. The criminal complaint laid out by Janelle Grant, the victim, and Ann Callis, who is a dynamite attorney. He was the first female chief judge in the state of Illinois. She's a killer, and it's bad news for them. I just don't see how this doesn't end without, a few people going to jail and a lot of people never working in the business again.
What a shame.
And so a lot of people think that this is just a lawsuit, but there's an actual federal investigation happening.
Yes.
And the feds, the federal, like the FBI, actually got Vince's like cell phone, and a lot of the things that the allegations are based around his cell phone activity, right?
Yes. Wall Street Journal ran this last week. I got word of it that something was coming down about the night before. But what happened is last year, people remember that there was a release by WWE. It was after the second quarter, saying that there was a grand jury seated in federal court, and it was looking over activities involving Vince McMahon. And at the time, people believed this had to do with the payoff issues and the Securities Exchange Commission investigations about, because post Janelle Grant, he paid a payoff to Rita Chatterton, who's believed to be he was one of the victims in 1986. She's a former female referee there. And there was somebody else that was undisclosed from around the mid 2000s. Well, that wasn't the case. This was, they were looking into rape charges, sexual assault, and sexual trafficking. Very similar to the allegations brought by Miss Grant. And it's been seated since last June. So I've asked the law firm, I've asked other people what's going on with the federal charges. They won't give me any answers. But the fact that that somebody from the feds have been talking about it since June, it tells me that they're probably in a lot of trouble. This isn't just a lawsuit. You pay money, you go away. This is now federal criminal grand jury stuff. This is something where somebody's going to prison probably.
Yeah, and say they do settle the lawsuit, right? And Vince pays a bunch of hush money, which is what his MO is. You're not immune. Like federal investigators can get copies of those NDAs and use those against you, right? Like those are submissible in court. Am I right?
In criminal court, an NDA means nothing. If anything, It just shows a way. It gives them a trial. It gives them a paper trail to go back and talk to witnesses. This was a situation that happened in the steroid trial. Emily Feinberg, who was one of Vince McMahon's secretaries, she was called the witness, and she had signed a non-disclosure agreement. And like many of Vince's secretaries at the time, she signed an NDA, and she ended up having to testify because it was in criminal court. If you're in criminal court, an NDA doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter how much money. If they bring you in to testify and you're a witness, you better tell the truth. And it doesn't matter how much money you took or whatever. That's how it works. You can't subvert the criminal justice system that way. And the sheer narcissism to believe they could keep operating this way is just kind of crazy. I don't think anybody. I think for 90% of the wrestling world, I don't think the reality of this is hit. I was asking questions about it back in June. I'm like, okay, maybe this is payoff oriented, but what if it isn't? This is the biggest story in maybe the history of the business. And, but I didn't know any better. I certainly didn't expect this. But I've been tracking a lot of this since around 2002 when I covered some, WWE, and I had sources in developmental and places like that. And I began hearing stories about Vince, going all the way back to the plane ride from hell, which ended up being multiple plane rides from hell. And it's just, I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to come out that no one's heard. But it depends on who ends up testifying, and it depends on who, if anybody joins Grant's lawsuit. Nobody else has joined it, but they are getting a lot of feedback. And I've been told by the law firm representing Grant that to stay tuned. It looks like they're going to be working something out, possibly with more victims to come forward. I don't know that for certain, but that's kind of what they implied. But to me, that's kind of a big deal. But, I feel bad for the wrestlers there. I feel bad for people not involved, but for the people at the very top, this has been something they've known about for a very long time. And I think Ari Emanuel and Mark Shapiro trying to play dumb to it, doesn't work for me either.
I mean, that can't be a surprise to anybody who's followed this business for more than a decade, right? We're talking about WWE 30 years ago. They skirted, right? The federal government went after them for the steroids thing, which they didn't really have anything on. When the Ring Boy scandal and the Rita Chatterton thing, where there was actual evidence for that, but the steroids was sexy in the 90s. So they went that way. And that was a huge mistake because all it did was embolden Vince. And if anything, he got worse, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, the steroid trial, there was a lot of unwillingness on the part of wrestlers to testify against Vince. That was one of the things that worked in his favor. The other thing was that the FBI screwed up the prosecution. There was technicalities involved. That's kind of what saved Vince in the end. But also, you got to remember Tom Cole, who was part of the Ring Boy scandal, who was on the Phil Donahue episode in '92 that featured Dave Meltzer, superstar Billy Graham, Bruno Sammartino, other people talking about it, the abuse that happened there. Tom Cole killed himself in 2020, a year after Ashley Massaro did. Mm-hmm. And his brother blames the stuff that happened to him in WWE for ruining his life. Now, later on, he came out and said, I think Linda McMahon tried to do right by me, and he supported her run for Senate in Connecticut. But, according to the brother, that's another victim that's out there. That's somebody people know about. They ended up firing somebody backstage because of what happened to Cole. So, it's there's going to be a lot of things that come out of this that come back 30, 40 years, maybe, possibly. I don't know that for certain, but that's the breadth of what we're looking at here. So we come back to the 80s, possibly.
Yeah, well, the Rita Chatterton definitely goes back to the 80s and 86. I mean, unfortunately, that's a her word versus his, and those are the hardest cases to kind of prove sometimes.
Yeah.
But the stuff that's come out, I see Konstantin Kuros kind of crawled out from underneath his rock and did a news interview.
Yeah.
And that guy's can be a little shady sometimes, but he was talking about the issue because the WWE claims Ashley Massaro never made a formal complaint when that's bullshit. We know it's bullshit. So it seems like
Laurinaitis confirmed that wasn't true yesterday.
Yeah, I saw that. So, and it sure seems like old Johnny Ace is working super hard to save his own ass right now. He's reliving, 2000 All Japan right now and trying to protect himself while everyone else is getting out of ship. So, I don't think anyone could be surprised by this, to be honest with you.
He's, it's like he doesn't have Kawada to keep him company,
Mrs. Baba's not around to protect him anymore. So
Miss Bob is not around. Yeah, and that's a whole other scandal to talk about. But I think this was I just don't understand why they thought. I mean, when he got booted, he got fired. He had no real legal recourse. He's gonna do what he has to do to protect himself. Johnny Ace, and he did not have the best reputation in the history of the business. And the Janelle Grant allegations against him are horrible. And if anyone's read the 67-page complaint, I've read a lot of horrible criminal complaints in my time, and this is a civil complaint, and it's up there with the worst. But Ace, I think, is going to do what he has to do. Maybe he'll try to work with the feds. I don't know. Maybe he is. I have no idea. But it's going to be a long slog through this. Most grand juries take about a year. I have a feeling this might be a little sooner, depending on if it's just centered around Vince and maybe some of his key figure guys and just goes back a few years, maybe it's not as long. But I mean, you're looking at potentially years upon years upon years of evidence, of discovery, of witnesses, and and people had knowledge of this stuff all over the company. It was well known throughout the business, and and it's gonna be there's a lot of stuff that's gonna come out of this, and I think it's gonna shake a lot of people up. But I think WWE and the end will be all right. There's creative people out there that can take over. Certain people can't, and they're gone. But yeah, it's definitely been a shocking couple weeks. I mean, things have moved pretty fast since Grant's lawsuit came out. But it's been time. I mean, what happened to her is pretty laid out. There's text message evidence. It looks like possibly video evidence. Just in the complaint alone, they had a lot of Vince's text messages. It doesn't look good for them.
No, it doesn't. And I don't know, there's a sick part of me that thinks that's really oh, chickens are finally coming home to roost. I don't understand how anybody could follow this company for any length of time and not just wholeheartedly go, yeah, I totally believe everything about this, because this has happened in some way, shape, or form since the since the mid 80s. So
yeah,
I mean, where does this go from here? The feds this stuff typically doesn't leak until the feds are ready to pursue a case. So, I mean, is this where we're headed next? I mean, will we see an arrest and an indictment of Vince McMahon soon?
I would imagine at some point. I mean, grand juries don't take much to do an indictment.
Ham sandwich. They say that the grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. That's the cliche.
Yes, unless you're a police officer with qualified immunity, it's very hard to get indicted, or it's very hard not to get indicted. And I don't, just based on the Grant allegations, I think that an indictment's probably going to be coming. I'd also say, based on just what happened with Grant, the way that it happened within the business, the way she was used within the business, the way this involved multiple people in the business. I mean, I think it could possibly be a RICO case. Now, a lot of the charges on here aren't normally associated with RICO cases, but that doesn't mean, the feds still couldn't try to push that. I mean, we really don't know until they present what they have, but I think this is going to go a long time, and I really think it's going to really shake up WWE in the wrestling business. They were kind of the last bastion of carnyism in their pro wrestling business. I think that's one reason why, former people there hated on places like AEW and TNA and other places so much, that kind of either cleaned up their act or started pretty new. And, nobody's perfect by any means, but, WWE's got a lot of dirt around that place. And, there's a lot of arrogance to think this was never going to come forward at some point. I think if people thought it was probably going to come after, Vince died. He is 78 years old. He's getting up there. He's had health issues, but I mean, sooner or later it was going to come out. And, here we are. And, some of us have been waiting 20 years on this, just to see if, not waiting, with my hands clasped together, hoping this happens and breaks through, but just thinking, sooner or later, this stuff's going to come out. Someone's going to complain, and and the courts are going to pay attention, and so is law enforcement, and that's what's happened.
It's funny. People who don't know what a RICO case is, allow me to recommend the film The Dark Knight. They break it down pretty well in that movie.
Yes.
And Giuliani basically made his bones in a RICO case.
Yeah.
Yeah, he made his whole career in New York as a district attorney, using RICO to bust the mob in New York. But I don't know if that'll apply. I've had a lot of people I've talked to that think that's possibly going to happen, just with the Grant allegations, thinking just how this was so wrapped up in company culture. And just talking to people through the years and what it was like. Paul London's recent, podcast, I think it was with Paul Roma. I mean, he shed a lot of light on just what happened with the divas and the other women's wrestlers. They were always stuck on planes with the execs. They were always stuck in the same hotel rooms. The pressure there. the fact that the Navy, according to Vice, they investigated Ashley Massaro's allegations when WWE for the last 15, 20 years has denied it. To me, that's a huge deal. I know that really rocked the company when it came out, and John Laurinaitis said, "Yeah, this happened."
Well, he said that they knew about the allegations. I really want to know what was in that investigation by the Navy, and I think David Bixenspan, who actually put in a Freedom of Information, a FOIA request to get that information, and I'm sure other people have too. He just talked about it yesterday with John Pollock, and so I'm hoping to get it, because it could have been like the investigation could have been as simple as, yeah, we read this, somebody brought it to our attention, we asked around, and we didn't get anywhere, because it was like at that point, like a decade old story, and it's really difficult to go back a decade like that to get all the details of it. So they might not have really went forward with the information. So I'd really like to know what happened with that investigation. And Dave Meltzer brought up something that I didn't even know about, that I guess before she had died, that she had actually apologized to the company for saying that. Did you guys ever hear that before? Because I had never seen that before.
I had never heard that until Dave reported it.
Yeah. I had never heard that before either, and I have not had the opportunity to look that up, but I thought that was crazy.
I want to know what happened with this investigation, because because again, she's a suicide, she died of suicide. She's clearly not of right mind at the time. Yeah. I would like to know what the Navy found out. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe you're right. Maybe there was nothing there. But I think Bix is going to find out about it, to be honest with you. Yeah. If you put in that FOIA request, it's coming pretty soon. This is bad, especially when you've got conspiracy. That's what we see all over the places, where they're openly denying that these things are happening, publicly, with a publicly traded company. This is bad. I have a hard time seeing the people in charge of this company now making it the year. I really do.
I think a lot of it's going to come down to what TKO's legal strategy is, which is, if we start firing people, then we look like we knew who was guilty and who was bad all the time. And otherwise, if you hang on to them and you wait till you have reason to get rid of them, with legal cover, then that changes things. I don't, I expect to see a lot of cleaning out in the, up in the C-suite. And I think there's going to be a lot of cleaning out in other areas too. But also I just, I think a lot of people are worried about WWE, what's going to happen with it moving forward. To me, that's not top of my concern right now. I'd like to see, I know there's a lot of women out there who are victims of this stuff. And I just hope that they're taking this opportunity to reach out to people, get, and men were also victims of this stuff. I think any of the victims, I'd like to see them go out, reach out, get mental help, talk to somebody. I'd also like to see people held responsible for this, so that this doesn't happen to anybody again. And I'd also like to see, and another thing is, there's a lot of women who wouldn't participate in this stuff, and it hurt them in their career, and it killed their career. And, they have a bone to pick with this too. The ones that got pressured, they got some benefits, but they got essentially assaulted. And then there's women that, because they wouldn't, bend to the pressure, they had their careers shortened or hurt, or went through abuse backstage in other ways. So hopefully that, we see some justice for them in this too.
Yeah, hopefully. And I know it is a tough thing for people to come forward. I hope that some people do, if they feel comfortable enough. The problem is that if and when they do, Vince's attorneys are going to try to rip them to shreds. And then not only that, his biggest defenders online, there's some really fucking fed-pilled losers out there. Just vile human beings that are willing to defend Vince at all costs. I've seen them in some of the videos that I've posted. I've actually started removing comments, because I'm like, yeah, I don't need that juju on my video. So that now they got to subject themselves to that, and when really they've just been trying to move on. But I hope there's at least a couple that are willing to come out and testify against him, if this ever does get brought up into an indictment. But you never know how this stuff's going to go. Here's the problem with Vince is he's been Teflon, right? How many people in the world have been investigated twice for trafficking? Right? This is it, because the Ring Boy scandal was absolutely trafficking, but they were just they were just more interested in the steroid stuff because like that was the hot topic of the day, like the baseball scandals and stuff like that. They wanted to use, they wanted to leverage, those people that were caught up in those scandals just to get information on Vince about the steroids, when they just should have focused in on that stuff. They could have taken down a lot of people that way. And I just don't, I don't have any hope that he's going to go down, but I hope that, or I just contradicted myself, but I don't have like a warm fuzzy that this is actually going to go through, but I hope that it does.
With the bevy, if the bevy continues, Miss Callis talked about how they're getting phone calls from people every day. Now, who knows how many of those are like legitimate, but I mean, like, people are going to start coming out of the woodwork, right? There's been a lot of like weird little subtweets going on as it is. I don't know, man. I think this looks pretty bad for the entire company. I could see Ari just being like, okay, we're getting rid of all these people, clean culture. We didn't know it was like this before, until he'd save his own face, right?
Yeah.
Because again, they all knew that Vince was a problem, but they wanted the company. You keep Vince around because he got the company. Well, now they got the company, and they don't need to keep any of the baggage. So I think it's time you cull some of the baggage and then start from scratch, because there's a lot of rotten human beings who work there.
Yeah. I think that, I think for people inside the business, if you're living in the business, you're traveling all the time, you're in that window. It's just hard to imagine Vince getting taken down because he's always survived everything. He got kicked off the board and he was in 9 months or whatever. He's forced his way back in, and then he's on the TKO board. But, you cover enough of this stuff and you're outside of that window, the world looks a lot different. But when you're a professional wrestler, you're inside there, and your career is always, one reason, and Conrad Thompson and Bruce Pritchett will show you this example, which is always kiss Vince's ass, because he's the one secure paycheck that's out there, and, frankly, I'm getting sick of that whole side gig culture, and because I think it's poisonous and horrible, and it's like disinformation, but that's one reason they do it. Vince was always that one dependable paycheck. Well, now you're seeing people like, Bischoff came out pretty hard against some of the some of the stuff that happened with Vince, but Cornette, he had the one, mistake where he decided to, put his live reaction out with Brian Last, but then they followed up with a pretty strong, Last sounded absolutely sick, talking about the case after he read it. And they said what a lot of people said: this thing looks dead to rights. That it doesn't mean it will be dead to rights. Vince has abilities. He's got a ton of lawyers. He's a billionaire. He's got a lot of resources, but that doesn't protect everybody. Harvey Weinstein had more than that.
Just going to say, Vince McMahon is a pimple in the ass of Harvey Weinstein, and that guy's going to be in jail for the rest of his life. So, if that guy can go down, there's not a doubt in my mind Vince can go down, because, people actually held Harvey Weinstein in higher regard than they've ever held Vince McMahon. Like, Vince McMahon's always been a carny. Like, he's fighting that perception his whole life. But that's just what the mainstream thinks of him. Don't let the Fightfuls of the world tell you different. Like, the mainstream has never respected Vince McMahon. I'm sorry. I hate Jimmy Van. Continue.
Yeah. So BJ, here's my question. If Vince does go down, God willing, if he does he take WWE down with him, or are they able to survive it? Because that's the thing about, he keeps getting compared to Harvey Weinstein, and I think that's a perfect comparison. Harvey Weinstein's company went under, right?
Yeah. I think that the TKO buyout, I think that gives them a much better shot, because, they're already in other hands. They already have TV deals taken down. Now, the problem there becomes, okay, what happens with USA and Netflix and CW? Okay, we went under these deals under false circumstances that you guys had all this stuff taken care of, or false, pretenses, or whatever you want to say. But to me, I think they'll survive. It's just that you got it's a huge property. It's more than just, despite what the McMahon family will tell you, WWE is more than the McMahon family. It's Steve Austin, it's the Johnsons, it's it's the families in the bloodline, it's the Rhodes family, it's a lot of people, and there's a lot of talented people back there that work. Adam Pearce, Gabe Sapolsky, Paul Heyman, they all have massive creative experience. There's ways they can survive, and TKO is a very rich company. It's going to be damaging, but they can bounce through this. And I mean, it's not hurting them in the ratings. It didn't hurt them in getting all those people in the arena tonight. Maybe once the federal case comes out, if they indict, which I think they will, maybe that hurts some things. Maybe that changes. But I mean, you're not seeing any of that coming across on Twitter or other social media places, like Mike said.
Oh, I think social media is a bad place to take the temperature of something
like
that.
That's true too.
Because it doesn't really, the people who are talking about this, they care far more about who's Cody Rhodes going to fight at WrestleMania. Like, imagine if the wrestling media put as much effort into this kind of stuff, the effort that you've put in, because again, you have talking to all these people. You're an actual journalist, not one of these guys that plays journalist on Twitter and just wants to be a content creator, and that's what's disappointing. But it sure feels like this is different this time, right?
I've tried, just to talk about wrestling journalists. I've had some noted comments and back and forth with a few, and one reason I've tried to push to them is that at some point you're going to be in a position where you're going to have to report on a story like this, because this is the professional wrestling business. I mean, there was points where we had dozens of wrestlers dying a year. Mm-hmm. And we're not talking guys in their 80s and 90s. We're talking guys in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And you're going to have to make the decision, okay, what do I do to live with myself? Do I cover this and try to, do the right thing? Or do I go ahead with my content creation and my social, engagement and hey, let's make sure we keep our access for those pressers where we don't ask any questions, but to me, it's just, it's going to have to change the media culture quite a bit. And and that's not just in wrestling, it's in sports and other places where it's getting more fan centered, influencer centered, and content creation centered. And God, I forgot what the other part of your question was, because I was ranting like an idiot. But
no, it's okay. I think that we're talking about Mike and I are kind of hard on the wrestling media, but I think at the same time they're just serving what they think their fan base wants. And I think part of the problem is I think the fan base has a hard time looking at this not in the kayfabe world, which is crazy enough, because pro wrestling fought to keep this kayfabe veneer real for so long that they eventually gave it up, and now the fans are the ones that are like, "Hey, man, we don't want the reality. We want to talk about behind the scenes of kayfabe. We don't want to talk about real life problems."
Oh,
that bothers me, to be honest with you.
I know people that are smart to the business that have followed it and have inside sources and stuff, and they don't even want to acknowledge this is happening. They just, they've even read the Grant complaint and they're like, "Oh, that doesn't look like a real deal. That doesn't look like this or that." And it's just like, what planet are you on? It's like, now they're not going through my eyes looking through this. I've been in federal courtrooms. I've been in state courtrooms. I've been in there for murder cases and rape cases and sex abuse cases and other things. And, and they don't see it the way I see it, but I think the reality is going to hit them at some point. And I understand where you're looking to WWE for an escape. It's not a good time to live right now. Politics are divided. It's gotten into sports. Mm-hmm. WWE is one of the few things that's just dumb, fun television. And, now this is happening. So, maybe that's why fans are reacting. They did. I mean, when I had my initial column about this last week, I got absolutely torched. It was the same day the federal charges came out. I actually written it a couple days before that. And, I basically said, Vince, it was an editorial, and this is my opinion. I think Vince is going to go to jail, and I don't think there's going to be any McMahons left in the wrestling business. And, and I laid my case out, but man, I got blown up for that. And to me, it looks like I don't think I said anything that was all that outrageous. But, this week, things have changed a little bit. I can tell you that much. It's like, okay, now another stone's unturned. Johnny Laurinaitis, there's that. And then, people are kind of taking into fact that there's federal charges now. I can tell you right now, even among the main roster, a lot of them don't understand what's going on with the whole case. I mean, I don't even think many of them know that there are federal charges. And I think they're probably finding out more as this has gone on. Because you got to remember, these guys are traveling all the time. They got families. You know, you're talking about women and men, and they're on the road traveling all the time, dealing with their own problems. And, you know, they're thinking, oh, well, that's great. Paul's in charge now. I like him better than Vince. But it's not quite that simple. And, I'm hoping none of this hurts any of them. But, you know, and I don't think it will. But yeah, I'm just glad this business is at a really strong point right now. I mean, that's one thing that's good. And that's for, you know, AEW. I think TNA showed that. I think what happened to Scott D'Amore, unless something else comes out, I think it was kind of ridiculous. But, you know, they've been doing great business. Yeah. You know, New Japan's just off to a very hot start to this year. They, you know, what they're doing in Chicago is phenomenal. You know, Mustafa Ali's, you know, should start his own promotion at this point. He's like the hottest indie act since Cody Rhodes. So, you know, there's a lot of great things happening in the business that can probably help, you know, buffer what's happening with WWE. But, you know, I mean, to me, that's not my biggest concern. My biggest concern is seeing justice for victims, seeing victims get help, and hoping that this is a way for them to reach out, for them to get, you know, to get some care, to know other people care, to get some justice. And, you know, and if they have to, you know, recover some of the lost earnings they did.
Yeah, absolutely. And BJ, I'll let you go on this. I just want to get your thoughts on this, because JD and I have been pretty hard on the media altogether. Is there just too many of them? Like, is that where we're at now? Because I remember when I was a kid, like, we had 12. Like, we had Meltzer and Keller and Bruce Mitchell and Mike Johnson and over on OneWrestling.com. And I think, you know, he ended up working for TNA, but like Bob Woodward. You guys remember him?
Yeah.
Not Bob Woodward. That's Woodward and Bernstein.
Bob Ryder.
I was thinking of Woodward and Bernstein. I've been on a Nixon kick lately. Sorry.
Way different there, man.
Yeah, way different level. So is the barrier for entry to get in right now is just way too easy? Because now you got a couple of schmucks like JD and I having podcasts talking about wrestling, and all of a sudden people think we're journalists. Is that really like the problem right now?
Well, I think you guys are very smart on the business. You guys are very informed. Your CM Punk coverage was very good and very correct. So I think you're among some of the best. I think this is one of the best podcasts on the internet for wrestling. I think you're definitely
I'm going to flip this and post it. Thank you.
Well, go right ahead. You can say that and put my name with it. But I think there's people that are in this and are not in it because they want to report or do journalism or write. I mean, back in my day, you wanted to be Dave Meltzer or Bruce Mitchell if you were covering it. I mean, my heroes were guys like sports writers like Tom Archdeacon and Hal McCoy. And, you know, in wrestling, it was Dave and Bruce Mitchell. And depending on if you were an opinion columnist or you wanted to be a news reporter or writer. And I think right now it's just you have a lot of people that are just, you have too many people doing things that aren't journalism related that are saying they're media. And then they're not media. They're nothing. They shouldn't be at press conferences. You know, if the girl can have an OnlyFans page and just do her reactions to stuff and then gets to ask 5 questions at a press conference, she shouldn't be there. You know, I mean, I'm nothing against what she's doing, but if she's not press, she's not asking anything. It's of substance. You know, just, you know, there's a lot of, and it's a shame because there's so many voices out there that are good. Samantha Shipman goes to a lot of AEW pressers and she holds them accountable on women's wrestling like nobody else in the business. She's fantastic.
Held me accountable to country fucking music.
No.
Still never gonna let that go.
But there's a lot of great voices and talented people that are caring about this stuff and know the issues and talk to people and understand the industry, and that's who we need to bring forward. But it's getting lost in the noise. And you're right, just with the whole social media stratus, it spreads a lot of things out. Where you guys have a very intelligent, very knowledgeable, and it's a fun listen to show. But you're getting buried between, guys that are talking about beer and whose knowledge of the business goes back to, when AJ Styles started in WWE,
Well, thank you very much, BJ, for educating the people. JD and I have been trying our best to talk about this case, but we needed somebody in here with a lot of experience and a little bit more of a knowledge base than JD and I to talk about the legal stuff. And I know that you cover like legit, like legal stories over there in Ohio. And so I thought you were the perfect guy to be able to bring on. And you're still digging on this
that.
case,
I really
and
do.
And we're looking forward to your to checking out more of your coverage, man.
Yeah, well, hopefully, as I said, I hope a lot of victims get help. I hope people are able to get some closure out of this, whatever happens. I hope whoever, responsible gets held responsible, and hopefully that happens. That's what I want to see happen. And, if that happens, that'll close a 20-year door that's haunted me in a big chunk of my adult life, my entire adult life. And that's, getting to live to see it would be a nice thing for me. I can say that.
Well, thank you very much, BJ. We're going to let you go. I just want to give some of your credentials here. You can follow BJ on Twitter at BJ Bethel Tweets. And you can see some of his work on there. He's always posted his stuff. He's been a part of Melbourne's The Age, Sydney Morning Herald, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Washington Post. Shout out Bob Woodward, actually. Bob Woodward, who got a shout out earlier for his great coverage of Watergate. But
I only wrote for the Post once, but I'll take it. Sure.
Hey, it still counts.
Yeah.
I've never written for anything other than my own website, and I had an article one day in Voices of Wrestling that I think got like 13 views. So thank you very much for being here. You're a true gentleman, sir.
Well, thanks. You guys are great, and I love your podcast. You're fun, and you guys are good guys too. So hang in there.
BJ. Thanks,
awesome,
BJ.
man. Take care.
Bye.
Take care. So that was
BJ. That was BJ Bethel, man. He's dropping some knowledge bombs on us. That was awesome.
I like talking to BJ because he's so much smarter than us, especially when it comes to like real journalism, and he actually does the work, right? And that's like, and he'll tell you what I talk to Callis's people, and I'm like, oh, okay, so you're actually talking to the people working the case, okay?
So that's what a real journalist does.
That would be correct.
Like you got dipshits on Twitter alluding to shit, saying they know stuff, but not wanting to come forward with any information. They're just wanting to allude to it and being vague, and then they want to post links out there to their stupid fucking YouTube channels. And without actually doing any real reporting. And so that's why I want to talk to a guy like BJ, who's actually out there grinding, getting the actual information, talking to legitimate people, and getting the stories out. So everybody make sure you follow BJ on Twitter. So you